Et tu, Brutus? Words that have resonated through centuries. Even those who have never read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar or seen a production know them. It has become a colloquial figure of speech in our times, synonymous with betrayal. And yet, ironically, the phrase was most likely never uttered by Julius Caesar. There is no historical record of it. It was merely a creative flourish on part of the bard. And one has to say, it was quite the exquisite touch. But how does all that tie in with our painting? Well, there's a funny little story here. It is not unusual to see Shakespeare serving as an inspiration to artists. But how many of those artists belong to the 27 Club? Before you start going through the names, we'll make it easier on you. Elisabetta Sirani, an Italian Baroque painter and printmaker, made this in 1664, a year before her death. It is rather weird to hear about a 17th century female painter in Italy. Women did not have many opportunities to pursue professional careers at the time. But Elisabetta Sirani was lucky enough to be born in a painter's house in Bologna. She was the first child of Margherita Massine della Mano and Giovanni Andrea Sirani, a painter and art merchant. Giovanni was the favorite student of Baroque artist Guido Reni and even took over his job as a teacher. He used to run a painting and printmaking studio, and this is where the magic happened. The girl's early practice started in her father's studio, much to his disapproval. Tentative of the prospect, he held it off for a while. According to Elisabetta's biographer, Count Carlo Cesare Malvasia, who was also a close family friend, it was him who convinced Giovanni to teach Reni's classical style to his daughter. Reni was one of the most famous artists in all of Italy at the time, but Elisabetta did not take his rigorous forms to heart. She was much more fluid with her creativity, utilizing expressive brushwork, bold impasto, and rich colors. She was adamant on wanting to make her own way. What she did share with Reni, however, was a penchant for historical and mythological narratives. Her paintings of the Madonna were the most beautiful to be seen since those of the great Guido. By age 17, Sirani was already a peintre gravure, or painter-engraver. But she was not only studying the masters of the visual arts, she was also taught philosophy and history, among other things. In short, she was a fairly learned person for her time and would go on to become one of the most able women in Bologna. Her first opportunity to shine arrived at the age of 19. Her father had fallen ill and could not hold a brush. So, she gained her first major commission. Over the next few years, she took over her father's responsibilities as the family's breadwinner. Her patron and agent, Marchese Ferdinando Cospi, noted that she is considered here a maestra, and it is she who maintains her large family with her work. Before anyone knew it, she was busy with commissions and had even founded a school for female artists. Bologna was a fairly progressive city for its time and had less intense attitudes towards female education. The highly theatrical and expressive work of Sirani had an immediate impact on the viewers. Most of these works were religious in nature and intended to spur a spiritual fervor in the audience. That general understanding toward her art being a force for good helped legitimize her talents to a certain degree. But there were still those who were skeptical toward her talents. So, in 1664, the highly prolific artist invited audiences to a live sitting in her studio. From that point on, she would sit down and complete busts in front of live audiences. Contemporaries sometimes dubbed her spontaneous style with rough brushwork and deep shadows as masculine. This is interesting since most of her subjects were actually women like the Madonna, who had captivated her heart since her early days. Her interest in women was, by no means, restricted to the Virgin Mary. Another important historical event to take place a few decades before the birth of Christ was the assassination of Gaius Julius Caesar, and it had caught Elisabetta Sirani's eye. But her approach to the subject differed from her contemporaries. Caesar was a populist Roman figure who had extended his power beyond reproach. The Romans had abolished kings and opted for 2 co-consuls to rule their republic precisely because they hated the idea of one man holding too much power. Due to his wild popularity, Caesar was able to circumvent the restrictions of the republic and extended his legal term, which was supposed to be 6 years to 10 years. Caesar was also complicit in multiple corruption scandals, but this was often overlooked due to his abilities as a military leader. But there was trouble on the military front as well. Caesar refused to yield his armies and territories to the Republic, dividing Rome down the middle, one faction led by Caesar and another by Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus or Pompey. His senators, however, did not take kindly to that proposition. 2 people in the Senate were particularly opposed to Caesar's policies. One was Caro the Younger, a proponent of Stoicism who put civic responsibility above all else. His daughter, Portia Cato, took after him. She was addicted to philosophical discourse and was truly dedicated to ideas of justice and virtue. The second senator was Marcus Junius Brutus, a friend of Caesar, who has sided with Pompey in the Civil War. Caesar pardoned him after emerging victorious, but like his fellow senators, Brutus was wary of Caesar's growing authority and considered it a direct challenge to Roman institutions. There was no surprise as to where Brutus's loyalties lay, as he married the daughter of Caro the Younger, one of Caesar's biggest critics. For Brutus, it was clear that there was no legal way left to depose Caesar anymore. Such was his power. An assassination was the last resort. As Brutus led the conspiracy to assassinate Caesar, his wife Portia noticed her husband's changed demeanor. Plutarch writes that she pushed him. "Brutus, I am Cato's daughter, and I was brought into thy house not like a mere concubine to share thy bed and board merely, but to be a partner in thy joys and a partner in thy troubles." But Brutus was unsure if she should be privy to this information. He thought that his wife would squeal if tortured. Were that to happen, the entire house of cards would come crumbling down. The dominoes would fall, the earth would crumble, and a few other analogies of the kind. The perpetrators would all be jailed if not outright executed. Portia begged and exclaimed Brutus to reveal what ailed him. But when she had enough of it, she stuck a knife in her own thigh. The gesture was meant to show that she could endure pain for the right cause and would be willing to play her part in the scheme. When he saw the wound, Brutus, amazed, and lifting his hands to heaven, prayed that he might succeed in his undertaking and thus show himself a worthy husband of Portia. This is the scene that Elisabetta painted the year before her death. What most likely struck Sirani about this scene was how women were expected to offer a piece of flesh to prove their commitment. As someone who had faced discrimination in her professional life due to her gender, this was an important theme for her. What's interesting about Sirani's painting is that it offers a contrast between the ambitious and the traditional women of her time. While the other women engage in domestic chores and gossip in the background, Portia chooses to bleed for her cause in solitude. Her exquisite red colors camouflage the blood, the symbol of her innermost passions, her secret life. At the time of his death, Caesar was saddling up to march to Parthia in search of glory that would have allowed him to exert even more power in the Roman Republic. Thanks to Brutus and Portia, the senators ganged up on Caesar and repeatedly stabbed him to death. It is interesting to note that one of Brutus's ancestors had led the revolt against the last Roman king to be abolished, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. So, the Republic was established due to the actions of a Brutus and ended because of the actions of another. Caesar's will revealed his successor, Octavius, who turned out to be a tyrant much worse than his predecessor. Brutus left Rome to escape the vengeance of Caesar's followers, but Portia stayed and fought against Octavian's dictatorial practices from within. Separated from her husband, Portia was struck with grief and unalived herself. Most historians believe that Portia was grieving for her husband's trials and tribulations, not his death, and simply fell into a state of disinterest and later died of illnesses, whether the plague or something else. There are various versions of the story. Old tales suggested that she swallowed hot coals, but modern interpretations suggest she inhaled burning charcoal and died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Plutarch disbelieved the story of swallowing hot coals. But Shakespeare used that image in his fictional play. In the play, Brutus is informed that his wife had taken her life by swallowing hot coals. Sirani passed away the year after she painted her picture. Her death was similarly embroiled in controversy. The family thought that a maidservant had poisoned her, but Giovanni eventually withdrew the claims. Some believed that it was Giovanni whose insistence on hard work had led to the young artist to develop an ulcer and succumb to death. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel for more fun stories behind famous artworks. What do you think of this painting? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.